It's hip to be square. It's Thomas Was Alone on episode 10 of the complete run at Limited Run Games. The closing months of 2016 saw two notable limited run releases designed by developer Mike Bithell, spaced a few games apart. The first of the pair, Thomas Was Alone, shipped on both PlayStation 4 and Vita at the end of September 2016 as catalog numbers 22 and 23. Thomas Was Alone is an exercise in creative minimalism that exploits the player's innate tendency to assign human traits to inhuman things. The self-centeredness that causes people to perceive the instinctual behavior of pets and other animals as being motivated by the same feelings and complex thoughts that drive us is exploited in its full measure by this game. Fundamentally, this is a simple block-moving puzzle game. You advance through 100 stages of increasing complexity by moving boxes from their starting point to a designated goal. It's a well-worn game concept stretching all the way back, at least to the early 1980s, and Thinking Rabbit's breakout hit Sokoban. You may not know the name Sokoban, but you've probably heard of at least one of its localized titles: Boxy Boy, Shove It, Boxel, the Warehouse Game, or maybe you've just played one of its many clones or imitators, such as Quirk or even the sliding ice block puzzles in the Zelda games. Sokoban was a fundamentally limited game by design. You controlled a small avatar who could only push, never pull boxes around a maze, seeking the proper order in which to move them around and place everything in its target space. Thomas Was Alone builds on that style of game, turning it into something akin to a platformer. There's no little warehouse worker here pushing boxes. The boxes are self-motivated. And rather than getting about painstakingly one space at a time, the boxes in Thomas Was Alone move more freely. They can scoot back and forth, leap, even perform running jumps. This is not a Super Meat Boy style puzzle platformer though. Thomas Was Alone can certainly be challenging, but it's very forgiving, and the player's pure finger dexterity doesn't factor into the action as often as in other games of this type. There certainly are some puzzles that mess with your reflexes, and you can strand yourself in unwinnable situations, there's even a trophy for it, but the emphasis here is on spatial awareness and complex planning and execution rather than on pure twitch skill. Thomas Was Alone has more in common with multi-character platform and puzzle games in which each of its different protagonists commands their own unique set of skills. You know, like Super Mario Bros. 2, where all four playable characters had their own aptitude for jumping, running, and lifting things. Or The Lost Vikings, where the three Viking bros had to collaborate to open gates and move objects. Or Trine. Or, well, you get the picture. On the face of it, the idea of a multi-character puzzler that is also a platformer that is also a box-pushing game, where the boxes are the characters, sounds maybe a little underwhelming. Thomas Was Alone gives you control of a host of different squares and rectangles, and they are your heroes. Each box is a different shape and color, and each one has different capabilities. The slightly vertical red rectangle, for example, has respectable jump skills, but they're nothing compared to those of the extremely tall yellow rectangle, which can bound higher than any other box in the adventure. So, you know, they're like the Mario and Luigi of this pair. Each box's capabilities are balanced by limitations. The yellow box may be able to leap to spaces far above the reach of other boxes, but its height makes it incapable of passing through low passages. On the other hand, the squat orange square can barely jump, but its minuscule size means it can easily squeeze through corridors too tiny for other boxes. There are other rectangles introduced to the mix along the way too, and each one brings its own special attributes and limitations to the table. The large blue box moves slowly and jumps poorly, but it's also capable of dropping into pools of water without being destroyed. The wide pink rectangle is able to pass through low passages like the orange square, but it also has a rubbery physical quality that allows other boxes to bounce on its surface to reach greater heights. The core challenge inherent in Thomas Was Alone is to guide every box currently in play to a designated space within each level. In the beginning, this is as simple as guiding each square along the ground, making simple jumps until each one reaches its goal. But as more boxes enter the scenario, the process of reaching those objectives grows more complex. You need to use all boxes in concert, employing their unique capabilities as necessary and compensating for the others' weaknesses. The orange square can't reach high platforms on its own, so you'll often find yourself lining up the taller red and yellow rectangles to create a stair-step that allows it to reach elevated spaces. Because the large blue rectangle can navigate pools of water, it often becomes a sort of raft that ferries the other boxes across otherwise deadly expanses. And then once you've reached safety, those other boxes will need to be arranged to allow the blue box to reach spaces it can't jump to on its own. The game ratchets up its intensity over the course of 100 stages, adding automated traps to its puzzles and forcing players to contend with disorienting new factors, like a green box that obeys reversed gravity. Eventually, you gain the ability to confer new skills on the boxes, mixing and matching power sets, which results in some dazzlingly complex puzzles. While Thomas Was Alone never shies away from demanding players perform feats of skill and reflex, the real focus here is on mental gymnastics and unraveling each new situation with the capabilities you're presented. Were this the extent of Thomas Was Alone's design and ambition, it would be a solid, if not particularly remarkable take on the indie puzzle platformer. It has great aesthetic appeal despite being a game about colored boxes. The environments feature subtle texturing and make use of dramatic light and shadow effects. The deep chiaroscuro created by the lighting scheme doesn't simply create a visual mood, it creates a sense of dimension for the world you need to navigate. It also makes the boxes appear more tactile, creating the impression that they actually occupy this world. It gives life to what could easily have been rendered as a simple series of geometric lines and shapes. The immersive visuals of Thomas Was Alone aren't simply a nice stylistic device, they relate directly to the game's narrative and themes. They underscore Thomas Was Alone's greatest trick, turning a set of simple geometric shapes into a cast of characters. Because when you're moving the boxes around the game's intricate puzzle spaces, you don't think of them as the blue square, or the tall yellow rectangle, or the red box. You think of them, respectively, as Claire and John, and of course, Thomas. Thomas Was Alone somehow manages to give a series of boxes personalities and emotions. None of the characters ever speak in their own voices. Instead, the game's narrator, voiced by writer and comedian Danny Wallace, provides a running voiceover that describes the character's thoughts and emotions at key moments.
The world was training him. He could feel himself getting smarter. There was the mental list to consider.
The brief monologues play out over top of the gameplay, never intruding in the action, never directly quoting the actual dialogue that evidently plays out between the cast. We only get impressions of their feelings, suggestions of their reactions to the tendencies of the other characters, hints of the quirks that drive their actions. Thomas is a little red rectangle, but he's also a good-natured and observant soul with a slightly compulsive tendency to take notes of his surroundings at every opportunity. John is a braggart and a show-off, preening in his ability to leap higher than any of his comrades. But ultimately, you get the impression this bravado masks a bit of insecurity and a need to be seen. Laura is happy that her springiness can help her companions in their travel, yet she stews in her own anxiety that the others are simply using her. Chris, on the other hand, is a dour fellow, embittered by his small stature and his underwhelming athletic capabilities. But he slowly softens as he learns the value of teamwork, and eventually he becomes smitten with Laura. It's an impressive trick of writing, establishing personalities for what amount to blank squares. Though again, the visuals go a long way toward selling the gimmick. The tactile, physical quality of the graphics give the boxes a sense of presence, and their animations make them feel alive. Every time one of these characters moves, bounces, or leaps, it buckles and flexes in a subtle but organic fashion. These tiny details pair perfectly with the running commentary, which places a selective focus on the inner life of a different character in each level, relating their churning thoughts to the challenge at hand. You know Thomas Was Alone is working its magic successfully when you aim to solve a puzzle and base your sequence of actions not on which box is best suited for the current task, but on which character you like the most. Sure, Tiny Chris with his pitiful jumps may not be of much use for most situations, but you feel so bad for the guy and his neuroses that you can't help but favor him when you're leading a team of boxes around. The running monologue does more than just give tiny computer boxes a sense of interiority, however. It also paints a picture, establishing a much larger story that drives and defines the world. Initially, this seemingly only amounts to a bit of existential pondering, the boxes wondering who they are and why they're here, but things take a turn for the menacing once Laura joins the group, followed by an ominous cloud of pixels. Events spiral out of control as you complete your stage goals, and by the time you reach the halfway point of the adventure, the familiar cast of characters you've come to know and possibly even love has largely vanished, to be replaced by a second generation of characters. As the stages grow in intricacy, so too does the storyline. A piece at a time, Thomas Was Alone ends up defining a lot of lore over the course of its 100 stages. And the Benjamin's Flight DLC, included on the limited run game's physical release, adds even more detail to the story. But it's all ultimately anchored in the hopes and aspirations of its characters, those tiny little colored rectangles full of dreams, uncertainties, and sometimes even nefarious ambitions. Best of all, players who explore Thomas Was Alone to completion will find a number of subtle connections to Bithell's next game, Volume, which, it just so happens, we'll be looking at in a few episodes.